What is it in me that is not yet healed, that I haven't seen? So it's an ongoing process of, to give an example, we might have a desire to be loved, to be wanted. Like, we carry that in our soul, right? Like, you died in that last life, but it's like it's in there. But if I'm still carrying this desire to be wanted, to be special, to be important, that's not going to go away. So we might come into a lifetime where like one of our parents ignores us, right? Like, doesn't give us any attention. And that's going to create a psychological framework where that absence of attention will lead to a very conscious identity around, I'm not loved, I wasn't respected, I wasn't cared for, I really need someone who's going to really just make me special. So we're going to attract people that will love bomb us, and make us feel like $1 million. And then we'll get into these repeated dynamics where they love bomb us, but then they're not really available to actually care for us or meet us or be with us or be present, right?
Welcome, Ari Moshe Wolfe. I am so honored to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you, Kelsey. Good to be here with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here. And the first thing I want to start with is that so many women, myself included, for such a long time, I felt disconnected from myself. I felt like I was grasping things outside myself to feel that sense of connection. And I would love to know, how can we use astrology to help ourselves understand ourselves to move forward in life?
Mm-hmm. I think like any tool, the relationship, the orientation that we bring to it is really the most important thing. So maybe I'll start by saying we could look at astrology in a way that only validates and confirms our existing narrative. Just like we can look towards any modality or any source that offers insight to affirm where we don't want to grow. So the way that I like to orient with astrology is to see that it actually speaks to who we are as a soul, meaning who we are prior to and even after this human experience, and how we've created this human experience as a vehicle for our own growth, our own evolution. So there's an underlying and compassionate view that there's a deep meaning and relevance and purpose to our life. It's not about suffering or difficulty innately. It's not like that's the goal or purpose. There's a gem, something deeply meaningful that we can all unravel. And so the natal chart really, it speaks to the curriculum. It says, as a soul, here are the dynamics that you're working through. This is the evolutionary intention. And you can think of it as, this is what you desire. This is what you're wanting. This is what you're working out. This is why you're here. And so what I like to do is look at that map and get really present with what's alive, what's challenging, what's real for the individual, right? And the beauty is being able to sort of see it, but from a soul lens. And so using astrology as a vehicle for that, to understand, okay, here's what's going on in your life, relationship, money, financial, career, health, whatever. What's the evolutionary intention? How can we take full responsibility for our life? Not in the sense of I'm responsible for what people do, but more so in the sense of I'm responsible for how I meet my life and how I'm choosing to integrate and grow from it or not. So it's deeply psychological work that just points back to our own commitment, and that's really needed. If we're looking at a natal chart, but there's no commitment or availability, even a little availability, to make a change, to see ourselves, to see our life differently, and to learn something that it really has no value.
Yeah, I love that. That again, you have that free will to take it either way you want to, and I love that. And can you talk about the natal chart and just what that encompasses? I know it's the birthday, the time, correct me if I'm wrong, the location. What else goes into that to understand that?
So that's the natal chart, the exact time, date, location of birth, and practically it's the position of all of the celestial bodies relative to that time and location. What it corresponds to, and again, there are many astrological modalities, and so like astrology itself doesn't say what it means. Like, you look up at the sky and there's no guidebook that says here's the right way to interpret the cosmos. So this is one modality that's very psychologically soul oriented. So this is also the evolutionary astrology modality I'll share. That's the lineage that I trained in. My teacher is Jeffrey Wolf Green, and he received this work from Sri Yukteswar. Sri Yukteswar was an awakened being that while he was alive was well known as a spiritual teacher of Yogananda. So this is a soul that just has a profound grasp of the cosmos and of the soul, kind of seeing our life from a much higher bird's view. So the way that we look at astrology is on the first level of insight. In this way of looking, the natal chart actually speaks to the context of where we are coming from prior to this life. So you think of this lifetime as the next chapter. Like you're reading a book, it's the next chapter in a series of chapters. And so there's an implied context. So all of the planetary positions, they all have a relationship. There are all these different cycles unfolding, and it literally speaks to where we left off. So you can read it as what have been the underlying evolutionary soul dynamics, the karmic patterns, meaning cause and effect dynamics, that have been set in motion in the past. That's the first layer. And then you can kind of look at the current life. The chart doesn't say if you're a man, if you're a woman, where you were, the culture, your race, all of those things are not in the chart. It's not going to talk to you about your name and your body size and your height, right? The specific context of our life will then have to be understood according to the evolutionary dynamics of the chart. So you ask the question, according to where you left off and what brought you to continue this journey in this lifetime, meaning what you're continuing to work on. Oh, interesting. Well, you chose a female body, right? You chose these parents. And so you bring it back, you correlate it back to this ongoing evolutionary process. And then you ask that question, how does the total circumstantial reality of your life serve your soul's ongoing evolutionary growth?
So interesting. I've never heard it explained that way, but it makes it so much more clear for me. And so going off of that, from like a soul perspective, then the time we come into this life is predetermined, and also the parents that we have are predetermined based on what lessons we need to continue to learn.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And I want to say the lessons that we need to learn, point back to, it's not like an arbitrary, like, I'm just going to plop down into, become a contractor and learn contracting. It's like the lessons are deeply relevant to this intimate, hidden truth about who we are. So there's almost like a return. It's in a way, like these lessons are actually more of an unlearning. There's more of a return to a greater power and truth that is deeply indigenous to our being. And then the form of the path looks like a lot of learning, and I'm going to have this experience and this experience and this relationship. But on the deeper level, it's sort of a shedding process, actually.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I love how you explain that too. So, because again, we can think we need to accumulate things, but it's really just letting go of those things that exposes the truth of our real essence within. So I just love that perspective. And going off of that, when we talk about relationships, because I think this is something that can get so difficult to feel, because we can have these tumultuous relationships or complex relationships. Do you mind sharing what we can learn from relationships when they are some of those more conflicting personalities?
Absolutely.
And trying to navigate that?
Well, what I like to say, and this is actually a fundamental teaching that my teacher brought forward, a guiding principle to our own evolution or soul growth is this idea of desire. So we all have different desires. We're actually here to play out our desires, right? And that's what evolution is. We create experience so we can play out what we're wanting to experience. But then everything that we play out really serves to bring us closer to ourselves and to learn more about who we really are, which means we're also shedding the need for experience at the same time, right? So it's an ongoing process of, to give an example, we might have a desire to be loved, to be wanted. Like we carry that in our soul, right? Like you died in that last life, but it's like it's in there. All right, I'm going to create the conditions in this lifetime, and I'm just making it up. There's no one size fits all, right? But if I'm still carrying this desire to be wanted, to be special, to be important, that's not going to go away. Whatever desires we have, it's almost like our desires are so strong, they're so powerful because we are this deeply powerful being. I mean, that's how powerful it is. It literally creates the conditions for our life. And so we need to play out experience to kind of unravel these desires until we can finally kind of see it through. So we might come into a lifetime where like one of our parents ignores us, right? Like doesn't give us any attention. And that's going to create a psychological framework where that absence of attention will lead to a very conscious identity around, you know, I'm not loved, I wasn't respected, I wasn't cared for, I really need someone who's going to really just make me special. So we're going to attract people that will love bomb us,
Yeah.
and make us feel like $1,000,000. And we'll get into these repeated dynamics where they love bomb us, but then they're not really available to actually care for us or meet us or be with us or be present, right? And then we're going to play out all of the colorful, intricate, painful, delicate human relational experiences until we can really come back into, what's my soul program here? What is it in me? And not from a victim blaming kind of place, right? It's like taking responsibilities. What is it in me that is not yet healed, that I haven't seen? And we have to recognize, oh, I'm looking for this love on the outside. And until we're honest, like, all things have to be seen totally honestly. We can't make any changes until we're honest about what's inside. So until we're honest about that, these patterns will not change. But then that begins a process where, okay, I'm going to begin boundaries. I'm going to learn how to identify red flags and all of those wonderful things we love talking about in this modern age. I'm going to study attachment styles, and I'm going to, this is the kind of relationship experience, right? So we begin to orient towards new experiences, and that is all a part of our ongoing growth. Nothing's an end destination, really. It just becomes an ongoing process of us learning to see ourselves in a more expanded way.
Yeah. So interesting. And so just that example of maybe attracting people who are maybe not emotionally available, and you go through those cycles of continuing to attract those people. Is it just your level of when you're ready to look inside yourself, or does it have to get to a certain amount of pain that you're experiencing at a soul level to actually have that transformation? Like, at one point, does someone wake up and get out of that autopilot to have that awareness of, I want something different?
I love that question. It's really fascinating, mysterious, right? If I look at my own life, I can say there were periods, years, where I lacked the wisdom, the insight, the self-awareness to even be able to look. And so there's sort of this like humble bowing to the necessity of experience. But I would never look at someone and be like, you have to suffer, because we don't. And that's the interesting thing about it. The moment we realize we're suffering, and the moment we're really willing to look at ourselves honestly, is when we can begin to make change. But the principle is desire. Unless we desire to change, we won't. And so we'll play out experience. So I want to say, like, we all play out experience because it's like we steepen it adequately enough. But there's this sort of variable, it's not in the natal chart, and that is a free will.
Yeah.
And I think in my own looking at this, this is very mysterious, because I don't, like, when do we each get to that point where we're like, I'm done, I'm ready for a change, or I want to shift this, I want to look at this, I want to heal, it's really, when do we get there? How long does it take to get there? It's a variable. It comes back to the power and the mystery of actually we have a choice. But we won't know that we have a choice until we start practicing that choice too. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, it speaks so much to me because a few years ago, my life just kind of disintegrated around me. And it was really in that moment that I looked at myself truthfully and saw all the patterns that were repeating itself. But I feel like for me, it was almost like I had to get to that point where I couldn't not look anymore. And so, it is fascinating because I would say that for most of my life, I was blinded to it and was repeating patterns of trying to feel like I was enough, trying to love myself unconditionally. And it was really when some of the closest relationships that made me I realized it was conditional love, that I desired it even more, to feel unconditional love for myself. So it's so profound because it was those closest relationships that opened me up to that I could see that. And going off of that, a follow-up question, because
Well, can I say something to that before we?
yeah.
As a parent, I can tell you, like, I can see my own children playing out certain stories and needs and desires, and I think there's like this compassionate stance that we learn to take, that we need to honor for ourselves and for one another, that sometimes like the quickest way forward seems the slowest.
Mm-hmm.
Actually getting involved in experiences that might be hard. Sometimes we just need to allow ourselves the grace to have that. And if we try to, like, if as a counselor, right, if I try to intellectually address something that a person needs to change, or right, it really wouldn't be helpful. It's almost like more helpful to honor and respect the truth that we're going to have experiences, and that is simply how it is. Like, that's literally why we're here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. It is, and I think when you have that perspective of like, okay, this is all serving me versus like, why is this happening to me? It's night and day shift.
Like, I'm the kind of person that I think my orientation earlier in life, and I think
Yeah.
for lifetimes, has been more to like, oh, this is really hard. Let me go and become a monk.
Yeah.
Let me, right? And I think for many souls, there's sort of this, like, the path almost like wants us to surrender to it and be open to the messiness of it. That the desire for it to be quick, it will actually create its own karma. And so there's something really humbling about, okay, I'm here. Let's just play it out. Do the best I can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, it can be really hard. Surrender was a word that I was like, what is that? When I
Mm.
learned, like when I first learned it, because it felt
Oh
so
my God.
foreign to me and felt so like, how do you actually surrender to that? But it's a very like, I don't want to say heavy because I don't want to give it that, but like it's a very full word to actually embody that surrender and just say, okay, like I see you life and I'm not going to try to control this anymore. I'm going to let it ride out as it's meant to. It
Yeah.
can be really challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah. Going off of that, because with relationship dynamics and and maybe dynamics that feel very draining, suffocating, maybe even on the end of abusive, and someone's in that role with that relationship, and maybe we're in that place of surrendering to like what can I learn from this, and you see the dynamics, and then you can go to the place of like, no, I need to walk away from this. What is that defining moment, or I guess how can you decipher between the relationships you want to lean into and be like, okay, I know this is really challenging right now, but I know I have more to learn from this, versus this has run its course and this is now time for me to move forward on my own.
Right. The answer that comes in this moment is we're always leaning into the discomfort.
Yeah.
Like, there's always a guidance to lean into the discomfort. If that is confused with masochism, then we're mistaken, right? So leaning into the discomfort means really meeting and seeing where there's pain, where we're experiencing pain and suffering, or where we're causing pain and suffering. To really get present with what is. I think there is a tendency for most of us to over-intellectualize the right way to be. I often think of it as there's a popular meme for everything, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, they didn't get you flowers, forget it. You deserve better.
Oh my
You know,
God.
they complained and didn't say thank you for working all day. That is abuse. That is narcissistic abuse. And everyone's a narcissist, right?
Right.
And so I think we have to be really mindful on the one extreme, on the one hand,
Yeah.
of our own egoic resistance to our own growth, where we're almost demanding a sort of perfection, or we're uncomfortable with people's profound imperfections. I mean, people can be really hurtful and mean, and abuse is a spectrum, and if you want to look at it honestly, any unloving thought is objectifying and uncaring, and it's using in some way. And so we can identify people with their shadow, with where they're still healing, and choose to put them there and say, I'm protecting myself from that. I'm done with you. I deserve better. That's so popular. Then a more spiritualized, but perhaps bypassing orientation would be, everything is calling me into forgiveness. So, but we're uncomfortable, we're suffering, but we're ignoring that. So I actually feel that in my body when I say it. So, I think many people listening, probably, I think those on a spiritual path tend to orient more in that direction. And that's been, for me, bringing love to the parts of myself that are actually like these little boy parts of myself that are like, I'm really needing you to love me right now. That's been a part of my journey, big time, right? So there might be a calling to really get present to where there is pain and suffering. I think where we often need to get quiet is where we don't know what to do with it, right? But there is a wisdom and a path that is best for all that starts in just being with the intimacy of what's actually happening. Then in terms of, you know, do I stay? Do I go? There's honestly no answer for that in a universal, like, obviously, like, there's sort of general red flags that I think for the most part are kind of universal when it gets to a certain, like, physical threshold, but it's like, to even give those examples would be kind of missing the deeper teaching, the deeper nuance that I think we miss. And I think this is where the journey of awakening, the journey of our own spiritual growth doesn't really have a map. The mind wants to grab onto an answer just so we can keep our identity safe, whether it's a spiritual identity that doesn't want to do the work of actually looking at what we're ignoring, or a prideful egoic identity that is never wanting to be uncomfortable, right? So honestly, this is a terrain that I respect that question and that inquiry so deeply. I can identify it in my own life, and I think for all of us that comes up in some way. And I love that question. I love that being with those edges and just looking deeply at almost like, what does the truth reveal when we're not trying to possess an answer just in the mind? It's such a beautiful inquiry.
Yeah, I really appreciate your answer. And it's just as you're speaking that like forgive, move on, let go, like really was I recognize that myself, that pattern, and it became very self-sacrificial to the point I would forgive and and reconcile without any accountability from the other person. It
Right.
became very challenging in those dynamics. So I really appreciate you sharing that spectrum of understanding that and also giving that freedom for the introspection to see what's right for ourselves, because only we can make that discernment of like, this is my exact situation, this is how I feel, this is what's right for me, my body, my nervous system. So I really appreciate that understanding of the spectrum of what that can look like.
And I'll say too, I think in many ways, a lot of our choices actually comes down to our choice between strength and weakness. Um, in weakness, we're literally seeing ourselves as small and victimized and vulnerable to a scary and threatening world. And so other people's behaviors will determine our sense of safety or not. And so we can't really ever even forgive them when we're seeing them as as a scary, hurtful. Our true sense of well-being and peace is not achievable when we see ourselves as small. Our strength is a different story. Our strength recognizes that there's a fundamental, there's a strength, there's a power, and there's a resiliency that's greater than our own. And it's not like a grandiosity, but it's a sort of grandeur that comes with who we truly are in our divinity. And I think there is a path ultimately on the higher level of, like, when we really meet this light, we're all going to be where we are. But I think on the trajectory of our own soul journey, the movement is, what happens when we really know who we are? When we stand in our strength and we're not looking for the world to define our sense of security, how we relate to the world really, really changes. We need less from others. And then where others don't show up for us, it actually becomes more and more and more of a refinement for us clarifying our own love. And so the path of forgiveness actually becomes greater, and we end up taking people along with us because we don't need them to change. And so we almost become a gift to the world because we've released them from what we needed them to be for our own security. And I mean, that's something that I think we all learn. And again, it can get very confusing if we misapply that. But ultimately, we have to ask ourselves a question: how much need do I have to hold on to for me to finally feel safe?
That's such a good question. I feel like I'll need to sit with that. That's a really good question in future. But like that's such a great question to ask ourselves in so many ways, like jobs and relationships and so much of life that we experience. And as we're moving through this, how do we know that our soul is evolving, that we're learning what we need to learn here versus maybe not? Like how can we discern if we are actually learning the lessons, integrating them versus just cognitively being like, yeah, I know that, but like how do we know we're living it?
It's a great question. I'll speak for myself, just where I can identify it.
Yeah.
Because I can identify my triggers and where I tend to get stressful and where it's hard and where my resistance patterns are the greatest, where I begin to experience a shared well-being. That I am actually accessing my joy. I feel content and I feel at peace with the world. And so people act a certain way or do or don't do certain things, and I notice I'm happy, I'm peaceful. And so it's being in a terrain that was otherwise challenging and finding that we're actually a different person. I think those are just very direct indicators. But more so our thoughts, our vibration, what we're holding. I mean, just like 99% of our thoughts, like what are we doing? I think if we just become aware of that, I'll say also for myself, I think this is something that many of us can relate to, especially right now with the astrology. I would say there's a lot of undoing and dissolving of even our well-organized, tidy efforts to be a good person, a moral person, a spiritual person, like whatever we may have been doing, even in terms of like daily practice, rituals, discipline, a lot of that is kind of like breaking down for a lot of people. And it might feel like we're not on the path, or that we've lost something that we used to have. I think many of our ideas and our concepts were efforts to try to get somewhere. So we need to not look at the form. Like, are we exercising every day? Are we meditating for 30 minutes? Because sometimes we need to let go of the rigidity of what worked then, but actually look at how do we feel. That's the bottom line. And there's always some sort of new form that grows and develops. And what is it? You will know them ye will know them by their fruit, something like that.
Yeah. So like checking in with ourselves versus checking outside ourselves, like outsourcing.
Yeah, like I'm counting my calories and I lost 5 pounds, but how do you feel?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, no, I love that. And I think it's again something that we can lose connection with, of like how do I feel without the filters of everything of like how I should feel.
Right.
It can be really challenging. And one thing that I would love to kind of go into a little bit more of like the astrology, because I mean I was new to this, and then the more I learn, the more I'm fascinated by astrology. I am very like novice at it, but when we look at everything that's going on in the world, like I keep hearing like everything's in Aries and all these things. Like, how do we look at I guess the global astrology versus like our own chart? How do we navigate that?
Well, you can think of it as like the weather. So it's happening collectively, but we're completely susceptible to it. The way that I think of it is that the cosmos and the current trends, like what's happening now, like the themes of life, they're not causative. They're not actually happening to us. They're also happening on the inside. Life is fractal. So the cosmic reality out there is also fractally happening inside. The movements of the planets literally are just physical symbols that we can track to observe these phenomena, but these phenomena aren't happening in time and space. They're actually happening they're not local, meaning, or they're universally local, rather. They're happening within you and I and everyone. And so to not confuse the map that itself with any kind of causative reality. So when we recognize that, we say, okay, my own internal cycle, right? This is the terrain that I'm currently living in. And that terrain is interfacing with our own soul program. So there are going to be seasons of our life and cycles that manifest collectively, but we're each going to have a particular relationship to that relative to the personal cycles that we're playing out in the larger cosmic scheme of things. So for example, right now, again, there's a whole lot of, I would describe the energy right now as awakening, honestly. It's a very strong duality right now.
Yeah.
And the transits over the next couple months are honestly quite profound, just profound. It's a lot of turning the inner radio dial to a higher frequency. And for many souls, that would be a cognitive dissonance. And it's like I'm losing a grip of the world that I know. So a lot of stress and a lot of hyper mental energy, and it'd be very hard, very, very hard. But also the stress will be impelling more and more souls to seek a different way, That's the gift of these high stress moments. So for many souls, it's sort of going to be a paradigm shift to just a completely different frequency. And at a different level of consciousness, there are different rules. Like literally, it's like living in the same world, but two different worlds. So that's how I would loosely characterize what's happening now. But let's say you're someone that has up until this point, kind of been clueless. I don't know what I'm doing. Then this might be a moment where there's sort of like these radical insights that come beyond our personal story, where we just see it. Oh, this is what I need to do. But conversely, like if we've been someone that's been working really hard to, make the 7 figures and just like kill it and hold it all, the level of stress, and I know you work a lot with high functioning women, right? So it's like, I think, and I'm seeing this a lot, many people who have been holding this weight of high achieving, high success, there's a level of guilt and unworthiness that's often at the seat of all of that. And really all that we're doing is hiding that guilt from ourselves. We think that we're actually a bad person. And so we're kind of keeping ourselves from looking at that, because if we look at it, we'll find out that it's true. But actually, if we look at it, we'll see it's actually just a story. So we're just protecting ourselves from what we don't want to look at, but actually it's safe to look at it. We have to look at it now. I think a lot of people are going to, over the next several months, by necessity, reach a threshold where it's just like all of the weight, it's just not going to work anymore. It's like a make or break kind of time.
Yeah. Thank you. It's so interesting. And like, how do we look at, when we look at the news, I don't watch the news, but you have an idea of like how the world feels right now. And it's not a great feeling. That's why I don't watch the news. But when we look outside and we see like, okay, this seems very chaotic, how do we anchor into like, okay, this is just something bigger emerging versus what we're seeing as maybe chaos in the physical realm?
Right. I think there's like a really where there's chaos is where there's a call for greater leadership and congruency.
Yeah.
The two imply each other. And so the chaos can lead to fear and overwhelm, and letting, kind of like a giving up. It's like walking into my house and it's really messy and it's almost bedtime. It's like, but it's like the level of crisis, if I really want to meet it, calls for an appropriate level of leadership and clarity and strength. So it's really a choice. Are we going to let ourselves fall apart? And there's a good kind of falling apart, mind you. Or are we going to let life impel us, inspire us to claim something more beautiful, clearer, more aligned, more healthy? But otherwise, we're not going to be able to meet these times.
Right. Yeah, it's really powerful. And yeah, I think it definitely, we see that we need more of someone who is that like higher vibration to like really help us guide through this. But I think that it starts with each one of us of being our own leader within. And for someone who's listening and they're maybe feel very lost in their life, they feel like, I don't even know where to begin. They're looking at maybe their circumstances and their life, they've worked their whole life and it's like, this is not how I want to feel. What could be a starting point for them to start to move forward into a place where they do feel the way they want to feel?
Again, I think the most important part is not running away from the negativity, not running away from the darkness. And there are many ways to do this, and I'm not one to speak for anyone. I love this really beautiful teaching from Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas, which is one of the Gnostic Gospels. He says, if you hide what is inside of you will destroy you. If you bring forward what is inside of you will save you. So there's something really powerful about the earnest commitment to not delude oneself from one's own fear. Something that I like to do, and it's not like I do it all the time or every day, but I find that whenever I do this practice, it really, really helps me. And it seems to work really well, in the morning for me. Just getting, where there's a space for quietness, just getting really quiet and just noticing everything that's there, looking at my day and, oh, this is going to be hard, or like, oh, all these things that are just like, oh, this thing from yesterday, the resentments, the grievances, the anticipation, the dread, the fear. And I think there is a little bit of a pivot point where we recognize, okay, that's here, unchecked, that's a program I'm just going to be running. I work with A Course in Miracles. I like to pray. I like to ask for guidance. I like to say, I'm giving this day over to you. You resolve this. You help change my mind. Every little thing. And there's a teaching in A Course in Miracles that says that we don't ask for enough. And it's not asking or like, help me. I think the asking has to be a real sincere. We actually are present to, I'm actually drowning. I'm actually, right? There's sort of an entreaty where we're like looking to be saved, but we actually need to do the work of being honest with where we really are and decide, I don't want this. Until we decide that I don't want this, nothing can happen. You know? Yeah. So what was the specific question, the phrasing again? Or what was the question again?
Yeah, I'm coming back to
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I answered. Basically, I forgot.
Yeah, I'll have to come back to. I'm not exactly sure because it sparked something else in my head
Sure,
right now
sure.
that I wanted to ask. But yeah, no, but I think I think it goes back to that. Like even some of the more challenging moments awaken the parts that are igniting that desire, so that everything is serving us, even if it's some of those more challenging things versus the things that we actually do want in our lives.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, and yeah, my question was for someone who doesn't feel how they feel, how they want to feel, how can they embrace and move forward today in this moment to actually feel the way they want to feel?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add progressively. I'm like, oh, I hate giving advice. Yeah, because it's like, am I going to follow it? Right. Am I? Yeah. It's so personal, and I really respect everyone's journey. But I would say, like, we're all called to, there's a next step. We're all called to the book, video, person, experience, program, park, hike, pool, hot tub, whatever. Like, we're all called to the next thing and follow that. Yeah. Follow that. But I think that honesty is absolutely foundational.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. One thing you said, and this intrigues me because you talked about the natal chart, and the natal chart is representative of like our past life and the lessons that we're bringing forth into this world. When someone passes, is there, if the natal chart is like, it's like predetermined when we're going to be born into this world, when someone passes, is there now like a new creation of the next set of lessons, or is there a reason for the timing of someone passing or why they're leaving this physical realm? Have they learned what they came here to learn in that time?
If we just think of the soul and the continuity of the soul, it's just ongoing experience, right? So it's not necessarily true that like one lifetime is going to provide a completion of a particular realm of growth. It's probably true that it's going to provide experience and that will further their journey, but the evolutionary process is deeply thorough. So I'll often observe that, and this can happen within a single lifetime, we'll often experience polarities in order to kind of work something out and be totally thorough with it. And it might be dynamics of inferiority, superiority, being a slave owner in one lifetime, and then, we're having power over, and then this guilt and feeling like, oh, I can't really grow in that modality. I want to experience what it's like to surrender, but then kind of creating situations where we're power under, or we're the servant, or we're the slave, and, issues of, wanting a lot of wealth, but then kind of getting lost in it, and then wanting to shed and choosing to experience poverty, but then like really a part of this greater learning of how do I truly experience abundance. So we're just going to be having experiences, but I think when a lesson is learned, like when something is complete, it is complete. So we don't repeat lessons. We might go deeper in sort of unraveling where we're working it out and create new experiences for it. And nor do we create lessons that aren't relevant. Like if I'm in 11th grade and I have to stay for summer school or repeat 11th grade, I will. But when I'm done, there's no reason to go back to 10th grade or 9th. I'm going to go on to 12th. All right. But I'm not going to like change curriculums, right? Everything really comes back to desire. It's like the ground of the evolutionary journey at its root is desire. We are only on this journey of growth and awakening because we're desiring to experience something other than what we are. Right?
Yeah.
We were like, that's the mystery of this whole journey. It's like the oneness is choosing to like fractal out into an infinite number of desires for everything and anything you can possibly think of.
Yeah.
And so here we are wanting something. And so that wanting is just setting the stage for experience and all the quote unquote lessons that we'll learn along the journey. But I'll say it's like, the evolutionary journey, it's not just like this human life. There's the astral plane. We as a soul have all kinds of experiences, but my general knowledge is limited to this dimension. But when we create the conditions for the next life, it's going to be simply relevant to where we left off. And the fun thing about it is you have to be a sort of soul detective. And I always tell this to people, when I teach, you can't look at a chart and just be like, oh, this is what you're working with. You have to observe it to the reality of the soul. You have to correlate it. Because I'm going to look at your chart. I know nothing about your actual life. So you have to be a soul detective and really go into like, okay, why are these conditions relevant for your next step,
Yeah. So like when you say soul detective, like are you trying to learn about the person? Like what maybe what their triggers are right now so that it exposes some of like that? Or can you go into that deeper? What does it mean to be a soul detective
Oh,
to
sure.
understand that?
It
Yeah.
just really grasps, you can be born at the same time, same location, same chart as 5 other people. But each 5 of those people are going to have different experiences. One, we all come into this world at different levels of consciousness. I mean, they're like different stages really of awakening. So you can play out the archetypal dynamics of the chart at different octaves of self-realization, right? There's that dimension. And then according to the unique way that's showing up for each soul, we're going to be creating different, you're in a female body, some other person is in a male body, grew up in a Southern Baptist fundamentalist religious tradition, the other person grew up in Saudi Arabia and has to keep her whole body covered. Like all of these conditions are not on the chart. And so it's going to reflect, our life is a reflection of the inner curriculum, and our natal chart is a reflection of the soul's inner reality. They're both kind of meeting each other in that way. So the soul detective is to get really curious about, okay, here are the things you're working with. Yeah, the stresses, the challenges, the triggers, the questions you're asking me. It's all going to tell me, one, how your life is relevant to this natal chart, and because it is 100% relevant. And 2, it's also going to tell me where you're at in your own evolution, right? Like the level of consciousness and kind of where you're ready for. And just to give people a sense of that, like these ideas of different stages of consciousness. To give an example, if you take what's your sign, your sun sign?
Aries.
Aries. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So if you take Aries, for example, for maybe 80% of the souls on this planet, Aries is going to orient itself according to a more consensus level of consciousness, right? So Aries as an archetype corresponds to how we instinctively orient and move through life moment to moment to moment, right? So it's going to be more raw, more instinctive. It's going to orient around achieving, and you do work with high achieving women, which is perfect, right? Perfect for Aries, right?
Right.
But the trick with Aries is it's almost like on a deeper level, as we become more self-aware, I'm going to go and do it and be a leader and achieve and go and get stronger almost becomes its own undoing, because there's a deeper realization in Aries, which is like, oh shit, I don't actually know where I'm going. There's a sort of chaotic recklessness in Aries that lacks perspective. It's like going to the gym and working out for 3 hours a day, but it's like, but what for? So there can be a more of a, I'm achieving, I'm growing, I'm focusing, but then it's like there might be a lack of deeper soulful self-awareness. So at more refined levels of consciousness, that Aries energy transmutes. And I like to describe Aries and the Mars energy actually as a self-cleaning oven, because we got to go full on and go deep. We just got to go for experience. And it's almost like the playing it out is like a burning of our own karma. And so the way that we use that sort of raw energy in Aries becomes more and more refined. I want to do and act in resonance with my eternal self. So it's like the actions become more clarified, more informed. That's a higher expression of Aries. And you can think of that with all of the archetypes.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. It's like I feel like the more you dive in, like the more you could like
Oh my God,
dive
there's
in
so much. It's such a
so much.
beautiful, yeah.
Yes. One last question, just a so when the location we're born in matters for that.
Mhm.
How about, I know we talked about before we hopped on like moving where, the locations we live in,
Mhm.
how does that play a role in as far as like the lessons or our soul, like where when we move, like is it new energies that we're experiencing because we're literally in a different geographical location?
Sure. I mean, first, wherever you go, there you are. So your natal chart,
Yeah.
your core soul curriculum remains the same.
Hmm.
We don't just like change. It's kind of like if you switch schools, you're still gonna have to repeat the one that you know,
Right.
the curriculum remains the same. But
Yeah.
changing locations absolutely matters, as does relationship,
Yeah.
right? Like, but it's I often feel like we can't. It's not so much of a quantity of time, although that often makes an impact. It's the quality of experience. Like we can have a 1 hour encounter that is profound and life changing, and that relationship is that person's energy, that person's soul content is merging. We're completely like even if we're hiding it, it's all here. All
Yeah.
like we're just completely absorbing each other, right? Everything's there. And that's what happens in relationship. And most relationships are going to be, small interaction. Some relationships will be a long journey, right? Location is the same way. We can go somewhere and there's this profound alignment, or we can spend, 10 years somewhere and there's sort of a deepening of how the energetics of that area will interact with our own journey. People do locational astrology and let's say, oh, this area is good for this area is good for that. My perspective on that is, again, same thing with relationship. The locations that we go to and the relationships that we have are only as helpful or useful for us if we're willing to grow. And so I don't advocate for picking and choosing our locations to avoid feeling certain things as much as I don't advocate that for our relationships as well. But all of it's here and we can't avoid it.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. Again, there's so many avenues we could take this, but this has been such an amazing conversation. And for someone who want to connect with you, learn more about you and what you do, where can they find you?
Absolutely. So my website, arimoshe.com, my YouTube channel, where I'll often share teachings on the current cycles, heart and soul-centered astrology. I offer sessions. I have a newsletter where I'll often just write articles to kind of integrate these teachings, what's going on. And I have a course coming up, a composite and synastry course. So this is actually looking at astrology and relationships, where we're going to be learning how to look at two charts together to understand some of the deeper karmic patterns and opportunities for growth that we experience in relationship with one another. And that literally begins in the next couple of weeks. So you can see all of that and all of my upcoming offerings. I have a school library as well on my website.
Amazing. I'll put everything in the show notes. So definitely connect
Awesome.
with Ari. This has been amazing, and what a perfect lead up to what you're offering too, especially
Totally.
talking about relationships and being able to understand those dynamics so you can actually learn what you're here to learn and through those dynamics. So thank you so much for everything. I really enjoyed
Yeah.
this.
Kelsey, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again for everyone who's tuned in. If you found value in this, which I'm sure you did, share it
Oh,
with someone
Kelly,
who's
not Kelsey.
also. Oh, it's all
I
good.
combine the Kelly and the Kessler.
Yeah, combine. It's all good.
Kelly.
But yeah, definitely share this episode with someone because again, this is something that's fascinating. You can really learn about yourself and understand yourself more deeply. So thank you so much for everyone who tuned in today.